I've never really been one for materialism. Just things don't always appeal to me, at least not now. I can't remember a time, even in my childhood, when things were really, really important to me. You always get attached to toys or you get attached to the things that you might grow up with. But as I grew up and as I became an adult, I never really thought much about getting things for my birthday or for the holidays. It was always about experiences for me. I always would rather trade an experience, something unique, something fun, something exciting, for something that I can just put on a shelf or pick up every now and then and play with. Now, that's not to say that I don't enjoy things. I have an apartment full of stuff, a lot of which has been scavenged here, there, and everywhere, some of which is things that I've just had since I was very young. And so, yeah, I guess you could say on one hand, I'm not materialistic, at least not in the conventional sense where I can just go shopping and buy a whole bunch of stuff just for the sake of buying things. I really enjoy experiences, even if it's like a good meal for me is a very much an experience. My first apartment after I was old enough to be able to afford an apartment was a 2-bedroom townhouse that I had near the university that I was going to at the time. It was big. It was 2 floors, had a huge living room, had a very nice sized kitchen, a lot of counter space, a lot of storage space. I was there alone, and yet I had 2 bedrooms, I think 2, maybe even 3. Yeah, 3 bathrooms, if you could imagine. I had a nice little yard behind the townhouse, and it was a lovely place, but it was far, far too big for what I needed as a single person. It was more outfitted for maybe even a small family, or at least a couple of people living there. And for whatever reason, I thought that would meet my needs. And I mean, in large part, it did. I was very lucky to have such a nice place as my first apartment. But one of the things I found very quickly is that when you have a space that's bigger than you need, it tends to fill up with stuff very quickly. So I just started accumulating things. Friends and family members would just give me stuff. I had aunts and uncles who would give me their old set of china, the dishes and such. And so it was a little bit strange. Within the first couple of weeks of living there, all of a sudden the whole apartment filled up with all the furniture and all the things you could possibly imagine. So I eventually moved from this townhouse to Philadelphia and moved to a 1-bedroom apartment near Philadelphia. Really lovely apartment. It took me a while to find it, and I really was grateful when I had the opportunity to live there because it was really well located, I guess you could say. Super cute. But about maybe a third the size of the townhouse I was living in. So I had to just dump a lot of stuff. A lot of it ended up at my mom's house where I kind of stored it. Some of it got sold off and given away to friends and family members. Or given back maybe to some friends and family members. But it was a first time I had to kind of downsize. Everything before then was like upsizing. And I found a lot of joy in it and somehow relief in letting go of some of the things that I had accumulated. And it was really kind of nice because so much of the stuff I had owned at the time served no real purpose. It was just there. It just kind of existed. And in my mind, it occupies a space where not only do I recognize the item in question, I recognize kind of its provenance, where it came from, how the person had got it before me, how I had gotten it. And then there was, to a certain extent, an emotional attachment maybe to that specific item. So in a lot of respects, there was a lot of mental energy wrapped up just in owning those things. And when I moved from where I was living into Philadelphia into the smaller apartment, and I had to purposefully downsize, it freed up so much mental space and energy because I no longer had to have that kind of cataloged in my head. I no longer had to kind of even recognize it. It was no longer my possession, and so it no longer mattered to me in some real sense. And it's funny because in these moments, you're downsizing and you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, should I get rid of this thing that maybe had been with me for a couple of years? And it seems like such a monumental decision. And in retrospect, of course, this has been 15 years. I think back and I can't remember a single item that I've either kept or gotten rid of at that juncture that had any meaning ultimately. The things that I had to make a decision about while at the time seemed really critical and really important and like they really mattered. Now in retrospect, to think about it is to think like, okay, what did I eat for lunch, 15 years ago? It seems inconsequential. And so it was, there was a lot of really great opportunities in that move to shed some of the accumulated stuff that I had acquired, to free up that mental space and that mental energy, and to come to the realization that those things that I thought were so important about my life and the things that kind of shaped who I am, in reality are inconsequential and lack significant enough meaning to warrant a place in my home. Since that apartment in Philadelphia, I've kind of downsized even further. So when I moved from Philadelphia to Oslo, a move international like that, it can be really challenging. Especially if you're kind of like me and you want to save some money. It wasn't as if I was going to, get a large storage unit and fill it up and put it onto a ship and then have it shipped over here. There was nothing in my life that had so much meaning that I couldn't fit it in a couple of suitcases. And so again, moving from Philadelphia, I kind of I begged my mom to let me store more things at her place. She has since sold off almost everything that I have stored there. So I guess there's a happy ending to that. But in order to kind of cope with that initial feeling of like, oh, do I get rid of this or do I keep this? I left some things there at her house. Packed everything up into a couple of suitcases and moved here to Oslo. So when I arrived here with my partner, we just had a few suitcases and that was it. Not that that was, a huge issue. It was just another moment to kind of shed some of life's accumulated stuff and focus in on the things that really mattered. And the funny thing is that those things that really matter often don't take up that much space, It's some of the lightest things that you could imagine can have meaning to them. And so those are the things we brought with us. And so, for example, my library of thousands of books that I had in my apartment in Philadelphia, just gone. I packed them all up, and my mom has since sold all of them off or kept some and sold the rest. And there's always a certain amount of sorrow that goes with saying goodbye to something that means something to you. But there's also that sense, like with the first move I made, that sense of relief that comes with no longer having to dedicate time and emotional energy to having it, to owning it. So as we moved to Oslo and as we got settled in slowly but surely, I've started to accumulate more things. And now my apartment here in Oslo, though it's a one bedroom, slightly larger than the apartment I had in Philadelphia, nonetheless is now chock-a-block full of stuff. And again, some of the stuff has real meaning. Some of the stuff is purely utilitarian. And some of the stuff is, I guess, somewhere in between that, if I had to get rid of it, I would. During the time I lived in Oslo, I spent a lot of that on the road traveling. So I've been living here for over 10 years now. And before COVID, I was spending between 20 to 30 weeks per year on the road traveling. And that's a really intensive travel schedule, but you get very used to living out of a suitcase. You get very used to living out of a hotel room and making do with the space that you have. And I guess mentally, in some way, shape, or form, I can survive at least in these kinds of smaller environments. And I, in some ways, prefer them to these larger, for example, the townhouse that I had when I first moved out. Those environments, again, you just kind of fill up with whatever you can find. You fill that space. So I'm very satisfied living in a smaller apartment. I was watching this television program on Netflix, Tiny House Nation or whatever it's called. And it's kind of a funny program because, they're challenging these couples or these individuals to live in these very, very micro apartments. And they're not too much smaller than the apartment that I have here. So I've begun to think of myself as kind of living in a tiny house or a tiny apartment. But I do enjoy it. And it really forces me to use my space super efficiently. So, if there is just a few square centimeters that I can repurpose or put to better use, I try to find ways of designing my living space so that it accommodates everything. And even my studio here that I record my podcast and my videos, all of that is housed in my apartment, and it's taking up now, well, about half of the overall living room, which is fine. But yeah, I've managed to pack quite a bit into a space that is modest, to say the least. But I really do love it. I love the closeness of it. I love the coziness of it. It feels just habitable. I don't have to look very far or walk very far to get my lunch or to eat something, to get a glass of water, to take a nap. All of these things kind of are within a few steps, which there's something about that convenience factor that really, really appeals to me. It makes me feel like all of my needs can be satisfied within a very short period. It's been a very short travel time, I guess you could say. Just everything is at hand's reach. And the place where I live in Oslo is really nice because it's centrally located. So I have grocery stores and places to eat and do things just right out my front door. So it's something that really appeals to me in one sense. It feels right to live where I live and to kind of be able to take the space that I'm taking. And so I guess the moral of the story or the takeaway here is that the space that you have, it's really what you make of it. It could be a hotel room. If you make that space work for you, then you'll be happy. You could have a 400 square meter mansion, and you're going to probably fill that place up with stuff. Maybe it's stuff that you care about. Maybe it's just stuff to fill up the space with. But you're going to fill it up one way or the other. You're going to make the most out of it. So I guess the call to action here is, if you find yourself just accumulating stuff that has no reason or purpose in your life, try downsizing. Just try taking one room and just getting rid of as many things that doesn't matter to you as possible. Of course, recycle those things, sell those things so they can be repurpose them yourself. But just downsize, see how it makes you feel. I think you'll be shocked to see how energizing it can be and how, again, relieving it can be mentally, emotionally, psychologically, to just unburden yourself.